So today we're taking a beginner's look at what functions are in Python and CircuitPython or MicroPython. We'll talk about what a function is, why you might want to use one, and how you can start writing some of your own functions with some practical examples. So let's go get started. For this tutorial, we're going to be using a Adafruit Metro M0 Express. You could use any of these Adafruit boards for Python. The important thing to note is that there is no difference between functions in Python, MicroPython, and CircuitPython. They all work the exact same. So even though I'm using a board, a microcontroller board for this, because we're talking about this in context robotics, it's not going to matter whether you're doing programming Python. So if you already know how to write Python functions, then you already know how to write functions in CircuitPython. So what's the purpose of a function? The purpose of a function is, well, there's a few things. One, it allows us to add a little bit of abstraction to our code. And when I'm talking about abstraction, it's sort of taking away some of that complexity. So it reduces complexity in our code. It also allows us to run blocks of instructions, especially if you have a certain set of instructions that has to be repeated multiple times. Using a function can be really helpful instead of having to copy and paste. In general, if I find you need to copy and paste something, you should probably be using a function. So before we write our own function, let's actually talk about some functions that we use from libraries. For instance, you've probably seen import time up to this point, and time allows us to use some time-based functions. We've used time.sleep before, and we put in a value for this. This is an example of a function from the time library or time module. Now, one thing note, technically if it's part of a module, it's called a method, but a method and a function are effectively the same thing in terms of what their actual output is. So we already know how to use functions and how to call those functions. We're already using the sleep function here. So for instance, if I were to just import the function, I could say from time import sleep. And then I can write sleep, open parentheses, 10, and then close the parentheses. Now this is what's called a function call, but in this case it's a method call, where we're actually calling the method sleep. So we're actually going to sleep for 10 seconds when we call this. This is the name of the function, and inside these parentheses is an argument or a value that you give the function. Now in the context of sleep, the value that you give it is 10, and that is 10 seconds for it to sleep. If you wanted to call it with a different value, you could say sleep for 5, and we'll call the exact same function, but we'll do it in a slightly reduced value. So let's actually, so that's taking a function or a method from a library. So you already know how to use these functions. You already know how to call these functions. But what you might not know is how to actually write your own. So let's write our own. So let's imagine that we have a two-wheeled rover, and we want to write a function that moves it forward and turns it right. So let's go ahead and write that function. So I might say def, which stands for define, and this is where you actually start to define a function. So we'll say def move underscore forward. Now, naming conventions in functions are the exact same as naming conventions in variables. Now, in this case, we're actually not going to give it any input values. If you remember on sleep, we had some sort of input value called time. In this case, we're not actually going to put an input value. And say move forward with a colon. And then we actually need to write in our blocks of code. So in this point, we can put in multiple blocks. So I'm going to say print moving forward for 1 second. And then I would say move servo number 1 forward and move servo number 2 forward. And then I'll say time.sleep for 1 second. And then I'll say stop servo 1 and stop servo 2. Whatever these functions would actually be, but we'll talk about those in a later video. So you can see that I've got a large block of code where I'm doing multiple things. I'm able to print a statement that says moving forward, move the servos forward, stop for a second, and then stop both the servos, and I'll probably put in a print statement at the end that says move forward done, so I can finish that. Now inside of our function, you'll notice that there's this little bit of white space. There's 4 spaces in between. After we put in our def and then our move forward, open bracket, close bracket, and then colon, it has these white spaces here. This is in Python how you know that this is part of a function. So for instance, if I were to reduce the indent on this line here, this print move forward done is not actually part of this function. If I indent it, now it is part of that function. So let's go ahead and actually call this function. So I'm going to write a simple while true loop here, and I'm just going to call move forward, just like when we did sleep for 2. In this case, we're going to call move underscore forward, open parentheses, close parentheses, but no colon. The colon is when you're actually defining it. So now forever, we're just going to call move forward. So let's go ahead and save this, open up our serial port, and we should, oh, I don't have time. Let's go ahead and import time up to start. Import time, because this is going to throw an error without time. So let's go ahead and save that. And now we have moving forward 1 second done, moving forward 1 second done, moving forward 1 second done. So forever, we're actually calling this function over and over and over and over again. Let's go ahead and write another function. Let's say def turn underscore right. Open parentheses, close parentheses, and then another colon. If we want our robot to turn right, we might say print turning right, and then we might say move servo 1 forward, move servo 2 in reverse, and then we might have another time.sleep, and I'd have to look at my robot to see how long I actually want to sleep for. Maybe I say 0.8 seconds is enough for it to turn 90 degrees, and then I say print done turning. So let's go ahead and actually run move forward, and then after we move forward, let's move right, or let's do time.sleep for 1 second, and then we will say turn underscore right, open parentheses, close parentheses. And then I'll do another time.sleep for 1, just so we can make it easier to see our outputs. Let's save that, go over to our serial port, move forward for a second, moving forward done, turning right, done turning, moving forward, done. And you can see that it's actually starting to call these functions. And I actually might even put a print statement in there just to show that it's even more true. Call forward, and then we'll say print, oops, print call turn. We'll save it so we can actually see that it says call forward. It starts to run through our line up here, and so on and so forth. So making functions without any sort of values inside of them is actually really, really simple. Now there's another thing that you can do with functions, is you can actually give them values for them to work with. So let's try this one more time. So let's say I want to have a function that adds 2 numbers together. It's a really simple function. Maybe we're making a calculator program. What I can do is I can say def add underscore 2, and then inside these parentheses, I can put in what are called parameters. And a parameter is a variable for a function. That's all a parameter is. So I could say number underscore 1, comma, number underscore 2. And then inside this function, I can simply say this word return, and I'm going to say number underscore 1 plus number underscore 2. So what this return is going to do is actually going to give us a number back. So I couldn't just say add underscore 2, because this is going to give us some sort of return value. It's going to give us a number we have to use. So in this case, I might say spam is equal to add 2. And then now we have to actually give this function 2 arguments, or we need to give values for these 2 parameters. So the parameter is the name of the variable, and the argument is the value of that parameter. So I'm going to say I want to add the number 10, And I want to add the number 30. And then we're just going to print the value of spam. So we would expect that if we save this over, we should get the number 40 to pop up. I could call spam again. I could say spam is equal to add underscore 2, and this time I'm going to add 25, and I'm going to add 10. And then I'm going to print spam a second time. So if I save this, we would expect the first time is we have 40, and the second time we have 35. So functions can be really useful for reusing blocks of code. And you can really do anything with functions. It really does help with making things a lot more clear. You can also pass variables inside. So I could say ham is equal to 10, and I could say eggs is equal to 30. And then when I call spam, it's equal to adding 2. We can add ham and eggs, and we can actually add in my variables as my arguments that I've defined above. So if I were to save this, we should get 40 again, because ham is 10, eggs is 30, our output is 40. So as a quick reminder, when you want to write functions, you write the word def, you write your function name, again, be descriptive. Same thing as variables. You can have parameters if you want. You can have as many parameters as you want to, or you can have no parameters inside your function. You can also return values or no return values. If you use a return value, you have to assign it to some sort of variable. We've already used some baked in functions like time.sleep. If they're baked into a library or module, it's called a method. And then not all functions require arguments. Some of them do, some of them don't. So I hope that it helped you with understanding what functions are, and best of luck with your next robotics project.